It started with one clumsy
Sure.
mistake. I spilled coffee on my neighbor's wife. I thought she'd be angry, but instead, that accident pulled me into a world of late-night wine, stolen glances, and three women who suddenly refused to let me go. I wasn't even looking where I was going that morning. I had my phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and the kind of sleep-deprived haze that makes every step feel heavier than it should. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and the fresh flowers the building manager liked to keep near the mailboxes. I should have noticed her before it happened, but I didn't. 1 second, I was rushing toward the door, and the next, disaster. My cup tilted, hot coffee spilling forward in a dark streak that landed across her blouse. I froze. My stomach dropped so fast it was like I'd missed a step on the stairs. She looked down at her shirt, then back up at me. Her expression wasn't anger, not even annoyance. It was something far worse. A calm, amused smile that said, "Well, this is going to be interesting." I'm so sorry, I stammered, fumbling for napkins I didn't even have. My free hand flailed uselessly, like I could somehow wipe away my mistake with thin air. I didn't, she raised her hand gently, stopping my words mid-sentence. It's all right. Really. No harm done. But the dark stain on her pale blouse told a different story. My pulse hammered as I shrugged off my jacket and offered it to her. Please, at least take this. Until you can change. Her fingers brushed mine as she accepted it. A small touch, nothing more than skin against skin, yet it carried a weight I couldn't explain. Her hand was cool, delicate, and the brief contact made my chest tighten in a way no apology ever had before. When she slipped my jacket over her shoulders, I finally noticed the details I'd overlooked in my panic, the way her hair framed her face in soft, deliberate waves, the quiet confidence in her posture, the subtle scent of something floral that lingered when she moved past me. "You're new to the building, aren't you?" she asked casually, like she hadn't just been baptized in caffeine by her younger neighbor. I nodded, still flustered. "Yeah. Just a few weeks." Her smile deepened, not unkind, but curious. "Well, welcome then. You've certainly made an unforgettable first impression." I laughed nervously, running a hand through my hair. Not exactly the way I wanted to introduce myself. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment that lasted a beat too long. Then, with a quiet laugh that held both amusement and something softer, she said, "Don't worry. You'll get another chance." And with that, she walked toward the elevator, leaving me standing in the lobby with an empty coffee cup, a racing heart, and the strange realization that I'd just met someone who was going to matter far more than I expected. A few days passed after the coffee incident, but the image of her slipping into my jacket kept replaying in my mind. Every time I stepped into the lobby, I half expected to see her again, though I never knew what I'd say if I did. Maybe another awkward apology. Maybe nothing at all. It was a Thursday evening when it finally happened. I was unlocking my door when I heard her voice from down the hall. "Hey, coffee boy." I turned, embarrassed at the nickname but relieved to see her smiling. She was standing in her doorway, dressed casually this time in a soft sweater and jeans, holding a glass of wine like she'd been waiting for me. Before I could reply, she tilted her head and asked, "Busy tonight?" I hesitated, caught off guard. Not really." "Good. Come in for a drink then. Consider it your chance to redeem yourself." There was no room for argument in her tone. She simply stepped back, leaving the door open, the glow of warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. Against my better judgment, or maybe because of it, I followed. The first thing I noticed was that she wasn't alone. Two other women were already inside, sitting comfortably on her sofa, wine glasses in hand. They were close to her age, both striking in their own ways, one with sharp, confident features and eyes that seemed to catch everything, the other with softer edges, her smile quick and welcoming. "This is him," my neighbor said as if unveiling me. "The one with the coffee." All three women looked at me at once, and suddenly I felt like I'd walked into an interview I hadn't prepared for. "Don't just stand there," the sharp-eyed one said, patting the seat beside her. "Come join us." I slipped inside, trying to steady myself. The apartment was cozy, low music playing from somewhere unseen, the scent of wine mingling with something floral and faintly sweet. The air felt heavier, warmer than the hallway outside. The second friend leaned forward, handing me a glass she'd already poured. "Here. You look like you need this." Her fingers brushed mine as I took it, lingering just long enough to send a flicker of heat through my chest. I laughed nervously, raising the glass. I didn't realize I was walking into a girls' night. They all exchanged a look, quick, knowing, and amused. "You're welcome to stay," my neighbor said, settling into an armchair with effortless grace. "Unless you scare easily." The way she said it made my pulse quicken. I shook my head, sipping the wine to hide my nerves. The room was filled with the low hum of their laughter, the soft clink of glasses, the gentle brush of knees as I finally sat down on the sofa. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a casual invitation. I'd been pulled into something I didn't understand yet, but I already knew it was going to change everything. The first sip of wine had barely touched my lips before the questions started. "So," the sharp-eyed one began, leaning back on the sofa with a sly tilt to her head, "how old are you, exactly?" I almost choked. The way she asked it wasn't casual curiosity, it was deliberate, a challenge. 24, I said, clearing my throat. The other two women exchanged amused glances, while my neighbor raised her glass like she was making a silent toast. She murmured, still young enough to blush at simple questions. I felt the heat rise to my face, and they all seemed to notice. The softer one, the friend with the easy smile, leaned forward, resting her elbow on the coffee table, her chin on her hand. "And what do you do? Student? Or working?" Her voice was lighter, almost playful, but her eyes carried a gentle weight, as though she genuinely wanted to know. "I just started working," I admitted. "Trying to figure things out, I guess." "Trying to figure things out," the sharp-eyed one repeated with a laugh. "That's the polite way of saying you have no idea what you're doing." The others chuckled, but I caught the way my neighbor watched me, not mocking, not even teasing. Curious. Patient. I shifted in my seat, the glass cool against my hand. The three of them together created a kind of gravity, each one pulling at me in a different way. The sharp-eyed one tested me, pushing for cracks. The softer one encouraged, her warmth settling me like a steady breeze. And then there was my neighbor, balanced between them, calm, confident, her quiet smile making me wonder what she really thought of me. At one point, the sharp-eyed friend leaned closer, so close I caught the faint citrus note of her perfume. Her knee brushed mine, deliberately, and she asked, "Tell us, do you usually spend your nights with older women?" I froze. My breath hitched, though I tried to laugh it off. "This is, actually a first." "Interesting," she whispered, her smile sharp but not unkind. The softer one came to my rescue, reaching across the table to touch my arm lightly. "Don't listen to her. She likes making people squirm." Her fingers lingered a beat longer than necessary before she pulled back, and I felt the absence like a chill. I tried to answer more questions, about where I grew up, about my family, about why I'd moved here. Their curiosity felt genuine, but also layered with something unspoken, as if they were studying me the way one studies a stranger they might let into their circle. The night stretched on like that, laughter, teasing, subtle touches that made my pulse stumble. I felt exposed and admired all at once, like they were holding me under a light to see how I'd reflect it back. By the time my glass was empty, I wasn't sure if I was the guest, or the one being carefully measured. As the night carried on, the teasing softened. The sharp edges of their questions dulled, replaced by something quieter. The music still played faintly in the background, but the laughter had slowed, giving way to pauses that felt heavier than words. My neighbor, the one I still only knew as her, set her glass down and leaned back in her chair. The lamplight caught her profile, warm against the curve of her cheek. She drew a slow breath before speaking. "You know," she said, almost to herself, "sometimes I forget what it feels like to just talk like this. Without pretense." The other two women glanced at her, their faces shifting with recognition. The sharp-eyed one no longer smirked, the softer one reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I didn't know if I was meant to say anything, but silence didn't feel right. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine, steady but vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "Marriage has a way of making you invisible, sometimes. People see the role you play, not the person you are. Do you understand?" I swallowed hard. I wasn't married, hadn't lived that kind of life yet, but the ache in her voice was universal. I nodded anyway. "I think so." She smiled faintly, like she appreciated the attempt, and then her gaze dropped to the floor. "He doesn't notice the small things anymore. Not the new dress, not when I cut my hair, not even when I'm hurting. After a while, you stop expecting to be noticed at all." Her words hung in the room, raw and unguarded. The sharp-eyed friend shifted uncomfortably, as though she didn't like hearing her strong companion sound fragile. The softer one, though, leaned closer, wrapping her fingers more firmly around her friend's hand. And then, almost unexpectedly, she whispered, "I know what you mean." Her voice trembled, and suddenly I realized it wasn't just one woman's story. The sharp-eyed one sighed, closing her eyes as though she too had things she never admitted out loud. For a moment, I wasn't the center of their curiosity anymore. I was simply there, watching three women let their walls slip. I put my glass down and found my voice. "For what it's worth. I noticed. I noticed the way you laughed in the lobby that day. The way you carried yourself, even after I ruined your shirt. You don't disappear. Not to me." The words came out softer than I intended, but they lingered. She looked up at me then, her eyes shining just faintly in the light, and for the first time all night, she didn't smile or tease. She simply looked, seen. The air felt different after that. Closer. Heavier. Their laughter didn't return, not yet. Instead, there was a quiet comfort in the space between us, a fragile thread of honesty that tied me to them in a way no amount of teasing ever could. The room grew quieter after that moment of honesty, but silence never stays still for long. It shifts, reshapes itself. By the time the second bottle of wine was open, their vulnerability had turned into something else entirely, a mix of closeness and daring that left me suspended between comfort and unease. The sharp-eyed friend was the first to break the calm. She leaned forward, resting her chin in her palm, her gaze locked on me with playful precision. "You're braver than you look," she said softly. "Most men your age would have bolted by now." I chuckled nervously, though the sound came out thinner than I wanted. "Should I have?" "Depends," she murmured, her leg shifting just enough that her knee brushed mine again. This time, she didn't pull back. I froze, caught in the heat of her proximity. My breath slowed, uneven, as though the air in the room had thickened. The softer one noticed and laughed gently, her tone kinder. "She likes to push people," she explained, though her eyes stayed on me in a way that didn't feel much softer. "Don't take it too seriously." But then she shifted closer too, her shoulder brushing mine, her perfume a delicate trail of jasmine that stirred something restless inside me. She placed her hand lightly on my forearm, her touch warm, steady. "You're holding your glass like it's a shield," she whispered, a small smile curving her lips. I looked down and realized she was right, my grip on the stem was almost white-knuckled. I let out a nervous laugh, setting it down on the table. And that's when my neighbor, the one whose blouse I had ruined only days earlier, finally spoke. Her voice was calm, lower than before, carrying weight. "They're testing you." The words hung in the air. Both of her friends glanced at her, half smiling as though she'd spoiled a secret. Testing me for what? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward in her chair, closing the small gap between us. Her hand hovered over my knee, not quite touching, and then retreated just as quickly. The absence burned more than the contact would have. To see if you'll run, or if you'll stay, she said at last. The sharp-eyed one tilted her head, amused. And? My throat was dry. Every instinct told me to retreat, to step back from the heat of their closeness, the weight of their gazes. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I'm still here, I said quietly. That answer seemed to ripple through them. The sharp-eyed one smirked, satisfied. The softer one's smile softened further, almost tender now. And my neighbor, she simply looked at me, her eyes unreadable, but her lips curved in the faintest trace of approval. The wine glasses clinked again, conversation spilling back into the air, but underneath it all, a new tension thrummed. The line between comfort and temptation had blurred. And though no one crossed it, not yet, every glance, every brush of skin, every pause in conversation made it clear, the boundaries were shifting, and we were all waiting to see just how far they would bend. The tension lingered long after the laughter returned. Every glance felt weighted, every touch deliberate. I could still feel the ghost of her hand that had hovered above my knee, the warmth of the softer one's touch on my arm, the sharp-eyed one's gaze that seemed to strip me down to my hesitation. For a while, I let myself drift in it, the warmth, the closeness, the unspoken invitation. But somewhere between my empty glass and their quiet laughter, I realized what all of this really was. It wasn't a game. Not for them. Not for me. I set my glass down and drew a slow breath, steadying my voice. Can I be honest with you? The room fell quiet. 3 sets of eyes turned toward me, expectant. I'm flattered, I said, my words careful, deliberate. More than I can explain. But it doesn't feel right to pretend I don't see what this really is. You're not looking for someone to play with. You're looking for someone who actually sees you. And I do. But if I cross a line, if I turn this into something reckless, I think I'd hurt you. And I don't want to do that. The sharp-eyed one leaned back, studying me with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. You're either very wise, or very foolish. Her tone carried no malice, only intrigue. The softer one's lips curved into a faint smile. She reached across again, this time more gently, and placed her hand over mine. You're different, she whispered. Her thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles, not in temptation, but in reassurance. My neighbor, though, she didn't move at all. She just watched me, her expression unreadable, until finally she nodded. Most men wouldn't stop themselves. They wouldn't even think twice. I have thought twice, I admitted, my chest tightening. Maybe too much. But I know how much it matters to be respected. To be seen. And I don't want to take that away from any of you. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, but softened, almost protective. The sharp-eyed one sighed, her smirk fading into something quieter. The softer one's hand lingered on mine, steady and warm. And then my neighbor finally leaned forward, her eyes softer than I had ever seen them. Thank you, she said simply. It wasn't dramatic, just 2 words, but they carried more weight than any flirtation had all night. A moment later, she rose and fetched a shawl from the back of the chair, draping it over my shoulders with an ease that made my chest ache. You looked cold, she said, though I wasn't. But the gesture wasn't about warmth. It was about care. About letting me know I belonged, even if I'd drawn a line. And in that small act, I felt the shift, from temptation to connection, from strangers with hidden aches to something closer, something safer. Something real. By the time the clock crept past midnight, the storm outside had softened into a quiet drizzle. The city lights shimmered through the streaks on the balcony glass, glowing like scattered stars. None of us seemed ready to call it a night, though the wine bottles sat empty on the table, and the music had long since faded into silence. "Come on," my neighbor said softly, motioning toward the balcony. "The air will clear our heads." We stepped out together, carrying the warmth of the room into the cool night. The city stretched wide beneath us, humming with life, yet it felt distant, as if the four of us had slipped into a different world, tucked away in this pocket of stillness. I leaned on the railing, the cool metal biting faintly into my palms. The softer one stood beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, steady and calm. The sharp-eyed one settled on the opposite side, her laughter softer now, tinged with something more reflective than mischievous. And my neighbor, she stayed close, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself before glancing at me with a smile that was quieter than all the ones before it. For a while, none of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, like the pause at the end of a song you don't want to end. Finally, the sharp-eyed one broke it, her voice gentler than I thought it could be. "You know, we didn't mean to overwhelm you tonight. We just forget sometimes that people can listen without taking." I turned toward her, catching the faint glimmer of city light in her eyes. "I didn't feel overwhelmed," I said honestly. "If anything, I felt noticed. Maybe the same way you wanted to feel." Her smirk faded into something softer, and for once, she didn't have a clever comeback. The softer one let out a sigh, leaning lightly against me. "It's been a long time since we've laughed like this. Or talked like this. Thank you, for not running away." I smiled, the weight in my chest lifting just a little. "I think you've misunderstood. You're the ones who didn't run away from me." That made them laugh again, not the teasing laughter from earlier, but something warmer, freer. And then my neighbor spoke, her voice low but certain. "I think tonight reminded us all of something important. That we don't disappear just because someone else forgets to see us." Her words settled over us like a blanket. She met my eyes then, and though she didn't reach for my hand, she didn't have to. The look said enough. We stayed there together, for silhouettes against the glow of the city, the drizzle turning into mist. No promises were made, no lines crossed, and yet, something had shifted. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We weren't just strangers at a table. We were something else. Something undefined, but real. And in the quiet of that night, I realized I hadn't just stumbled into an accident. I'd found a place I didn't know I was searching for. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?